The evacuation convoy stretched across the darkness like a string of glowing pearls. 15 civilian transports carried refugees away from the war zones, their hulls packed with families who had lost everything. The gentle current flew at the center of the formation, her captain watching the scanner displays with tired eyes. Lilac had been flying rescue missions for 3 years now. The war between the Krell Empire and the outer colonies had displaced millions, and her people, the Passerines, had sworn to help anyone who needed it. Her species believed in peace above all else. They carried no weapons, trusted in galactic law to protect humanitarian vessels. That trust was about to be tested. The first alarm came from the sensor station. Her navigator, a young male named Whistler, went rigid in his seat. 3 contacts had appeared on the edge of their range, moving fast and with clear hostile intent. Lilac felt her stomach drop as she recognized the signature patterns. Ravagers. The pirate fleet had been growing bolder in recent months, attacking even protected convoys. They ignored every law, every treaty, every appeal to basic decency. Refugees meant slaves to them. Unarmed ships meant easy targets. Lilac opened channels to the other 14 transports. Her voice stayed calm despite the fear climbing up her throat. The convoy needed a leader right now, not someone who panicked. She ordered the ships to tighten formation and increase speed. Maybe they could reach the border of council space before the pirates caught up. The Ravager vessels closed the distance in minutes. 3 heavy corsairs, each one bristling with weapons that could tear through civilian shields like paper. Lilac watched them approach and knew running was pointless. Her ship could barely manage half the speed those raiders carried. The lead Ravager broadcast a message. The voice was rough and filled with cruel amusement. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. All cargo and passengers would be confiscated. Resistance would be met with total annihilation. Around her bridge, the crew looked to Lilac for orders. What could she tell them? They had 3,000 refugees aboard the gentle current alone, families with children, elderly who had already survived one nightmare. Surrendering meant slavery or worse. Fighting was impossible without weapons. She activated the emergency beacon. The distress call went out on every frequency, screaming into the void that civilian vessels needed help. Lilac knew the chances of rescue were nearly zero. They were too far from any military outpost. No council patrol would reach them in time. Whistler was already recording final messages to his family. Others on the bridge did the same. Lilac thought about her own children, safe on the Passerine homeworld. At least they would survive. At least they would remember her as someone who tried to help others. The Ravagers moved into attack position. Their weapons began charging, energy readings spiking on the gentle current sensors. Lilac opened an internal channel to all 15 ships. She told the refugees to brace for impact, told them she was sorry, told them to stay strong. Then something impossible happened. A new voice cut through every channel, clear and sharp and utterly unexpected. Human. The accent was strange, but the words were perfectly understandable. Distress call received. Human defense fleet responding. Hold position. Lilac stared at her communications officer in confusion. Humans. The species from that death world everyone whispered about. She had heard stories but never met one. Earth was listed as a Level 9 hazard planet in the databases. The dominant species there had only reached space travel a few decades ago. 4 massive shapes tore through subspace directly between the convoy and the Ravager fleet. The human warships were huge, built with strange angular lines and covered in what looked like extra armor plating. Their names appeared on the scanner: Thunder's Wake, Pacific Guard, Mountain's Fury, Desert Storm. The lead human vessel hailed the gentle current. A woman's voice, steady and commanding. Admiral Torres identified herself and gave a simple instruction: get your people to safety. You're under human protection now. The Ravagers apparently found this hilarious. Their commander laughed over the open channel, 4 ships against 3. The humans were either brave or stupid. He suggested they leave before getting hurt. Admiral Tors responded with ice in her voice. She gave the Ravagers one chance to withdraw. Leave now or learn why threatening refugees near Earth space was a bad idea. The way she said it made Lilac's feathers stand on end. This was not a woman who made empty threats. The Ravager commander rejected the warning. He saw 4 vessels, assumed 4 easy targets. His scanners told him the human ships were smaller than his heavy corsairs. He ordered his fleet to disable the refugee transport while destroying the foolish Deathworlders who had interfered. Lilac watched the tactical display as the battle began. One Ravager peeled off toward the gentle current, while the other 2 moved to engage the human fleet. She expected the humans to scatter or retreat. That was the logical response to superior numbers and firepower. Instead, the Pacific Guard slid smoothly between the attacking Ravager and the convoy. The human ship positioned itself like a shield, weapons tracking the pirate vessel with disturbing precision. The other 3 human warships formed a triangle around the remaining Ravagers, boxing them in. Then small craft began launching from the human vessels. Dozens of tiny fighters that swarmed out like angry insects. They flew in patterns that seemed completely reckless, weaving through incoming fire with impossible speed. Lilac had never seen pilots take such risks. The first exchange of weapons fire lit up the darkness. Ravager plasma cannons hammered into the thunder's wake, and Lilac expected to see the human ship's shields collapse. Instead, the vessel pushed forward into the fire, closing distance while taking hit after hit. The shields flickered but held, and underneath them, heavy armor plating absorbed what got through. Then the human ships returned fire, and Lilac understood why the Ravagers had made a terrible mistake. These were not standard energy weapons. The humans used kinetic railguns that fired solid projectiles at incredible speeds. The rounds punched straight through Ravager shields and tore into hull plating. The battle had only just begun, but already Lilac could see the outcome. The Ravagers had encountered something they did not understand. They had threatened refugees and expected an easy victory. They had found Deathworlders instead. The Ravager commander had expected a quick fight. His 3 heavy corsairs outgunned the human vessels on paper, and his crews had raided dozens of systems without serious opposition. Skulltaker Grend had earned his name through brutality and tactical cunning. He saw 4 unknown ships and calculated easy prey. He was about to learn how badly he had miscalculated. Pacific Guard held position in front of the refugee convoy like an immovable wall. The Ravager vessel attacking it unleashed full weapons fire, plasma cannons blazing at maximum output. Commander Hayes watched the energy readings climb and calmly ordered his crew to redistribute power to forward shields. The human ship absorbed the assault without retreating a single meter. Grend watched from his command deck and felt the first stirring of unease. Most species fled when taking that much damage. The humans just sat there and took it. Then Pacific Guard fired back. Point defense systems shredded incoming missiles while heavier weapons locked onto the Ravager's weapon emplacements. Hayes had positioned his ship perfectly. Every shot found a target. Within 30 seconds, the attacking Corsair had lost half its offensive capability. Meanwhile, Thunder's Wake was doing something that violated every tactical doctrine Gren knew. Admiral Tors had ordered her ship straight into the heaviest fire from the other 2 Ravagers. Plasma bolts hammered into her hull, and instead of evading, she pushed closer. The human ship's shields flickered and collapsed under the sustained assault. Grend allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Without shields, the vessel was finished. Except the humans had built their ships differently than every other species in the galaxy. Beneath the shields lay layered armor plating, thick and redundant. The plasma fire scorched the hull but failed to penetrate. Tors kept advancing while her railguns spoke in measured bursts. Each kinetic round traveled at a significant fraction of light speed. Energy shields meant to stop plasma did nothing against solid metal. The rounds punched through Ravager defenses and tore into critical systems. One Corsair lost its main drive. Another watched its weapon arrays shatter under the impacts. Grend realized with growing horror that human ships were designed to take punishment and keep fighting. They were built like their makers, tough, redundant, refusing to quit. Mountain's Fury and Desert Storm had flanked wide during the initial exchange. Now they struck from unexpected angles, hammering the already damaged Ravagers. The human pilots in their small fighters kept weaving impossible patterns, drawing fire and creating chaos in Ravager formations. On the bridge of the Gentle Current, Lilac and her crew watched in stunned silence. The young communications officer had tapped into human command channels. What she heard made no sense. The humans were laughing, joking with each other. Calling out targets like this was a training exercise instead of a life-or-death battle. "They're not afraid," Whistler whispered, and something about that observation struck Lilac deeply. Every species she knew feared combat. Even the most aggressive warriors felt the weight of potential death. These humans seemed almost relaxed. One of the human pilots came on the general channel, his voice bright with excitement. He had just disabled a Ravager weapons turret and was asking his wingmate to confirm the kill. The response was casual banter about buying drinks later. They sounded like people playing a game, not fighting for their lives. Grend finally understood his mistake. These were Deathworlders, real ones, not just the classification in a database. They came from a world so hostile that combat was second nature. Taking damage and pushing forward was how they survived everything their planet threw at them. He ordered full retreat. Let the refugees go. Let the humans have this victory. His ships could escape and raid easier targets elsewhere. Survival meant more than pride. Admiral Torres had anticipated this response. Her 3 ships had been slowly adjusting position throughout the fight, and now they had cut off every escape vector. The Ravagers could fight or surrender, but running was no longer an option. "You threatened refugees," Torres said over the open channel, her voice colder than vacuum. "You don't get to leave." Desert Storm revealed its specialty in that moment. The vessel had been running electronic warfare suites since the battle began, quietly infiltrating Ravager computer systems. Now the attack went active. Navigation systems crashed. Weapons began misfiring. Internal communications dissolved into static. The Ravagers lost coordination completely. One ship fired on its companion by accident, adding to the chaos. Their numbers had been an advantage, but without communication, they became a liability. Ships collided trying to evade human fire. Grend attempted to broadcast surrender, but his communications were jammed. He watched helplessly as human boarding craft launched from all 4 vessels. Small, fast ships that carried armed teams. They latched onto Ravager hulls and began cutting through. The boarding action lasted 15 minutes. Human soldiers moved through the Corsairs with frightening efficiency, securing every deck and disarming every crew member. They used non-lethal weapons when possible, but met resistance with overwhelming force. Grend found himself in restraints, watching human marines secure his command deck. They were shorter than most galactic species, but moved with absolute confidence. One of them, a female soldier with sharp eyes, approached him directly. "You picked the wrong convoy," she said simply. "We patrol these routes specifically looking for people like you." The full picture came together in Grend's mind. The humans had not arrived by chance. They actively hunted pirate vessels near refugee paths. They had set themselves up as protectors without being asked, without expecting payment. Back on the Gentle Current, Lilac received a transmission from Admiral Torres. The threat was neutralized. Medical teams were ready to check on the refugees if permission was granted. The concern in the Admiral's voice was genuine. Lilac gave permission immediately and then sat back in her chair, trying to process what had just happened. 4 human ships had defeated 3 Ravager corsairs in under 25 minutes. They had taken damage that would have destroyed most vessels and kept fighting. They had protected total strangers without hesitation. The bridge crew was silent until Whistler spoke again. "They came for us. They actually came." "They did," Lilac agreed softly. Somewhere in her mind, everything she thought she knew about Deathworlders was being rewritten. These were not mindless warriors or violent brutes. They were something far more dangerous and far more wonderful. They were protectors who meant what they said. Dr. Patterson stepped through the airlock onto the gentle current carrying 2 large cases of medical supplies. Behind her, 3 more human medics followed with equipment designed to treat multiple species. They had prepared for this during the journey, studying passerine physiology and common refugee injuries. Lilac waited in the docking bay, uncertain what to expect. She had seen these humans fight with brutal efficiency just an hour ago. Now they were offering medical care like it was the most natural thing in the universe. The contradiction confused her. Patterson noticed Lilac's tension immediately. She set down her cases and approached slowly, keeping her hands visible and her posture non-threatening. "Captain Lilac, I'm Dr. Patterson. We'd like to check on your people if that's okay." The gentleness in her voice surprised Lilac. This was not how warriors typically behaved. "You want to help us?" "Of course," Patterson replied, looking genuinely puzzled by the question. "You've got 3,000 people who just went through something traumatic. We need to make sure everyone's physically okay." Lilac led the medical team through the refugee sections. The human doctors moved carefully through the crowded spaces, aware that their presence might frighten people who had just watched a violent battle. Patterson knelt beside frightened children, speaking softly and moving slowly to avoid startling them. A young passerine girl had been injured when the ship took minor damage during the fight. Nothing serious, but she was crying and clinging to her mother. Patterson approached with a small scanner, showing it to the child first before using it. "This won't hurt, little one," she said gently. "I just need to make sure you're healing properly." The scanner confirmed minor bruising, but nothing requiring intensive treatment. Patterson applied a dermal regenerator and handed the girl a small stuffed animal from her medical kit. "You were very brave today. This is for being such a good patient." The child hugged the toy and stopped crying. Her mother looked at Patterson with grateful tears in her eyes. The human doctor smiled and moved to the next patient, treating each refugee with the same careful compassion. Meanwhile, Admiral Torres had invited Lilac to Thunder's wake for a formal meeting. The passerine captain found herself walking through a human warship, seeing up close how these Deathworlders actually lived. The corridors were narrow and efficient. Every surface served multiple purposes. Pipes and conduits ran exposed along walls, making repairs easier. Nothing was wasted on aesthetics. The ship was purely functional, built to survive damage and keep fighting. Torres waited in a small conference room. She had changed from her combat uniform into simpler clothes, though she still carried herself with military bearing. She offered Lilac a chair and something to drink. "Thank you for coming," Torres said. "I wanted to check in personally, make sure you and your people are really okay." Lilac studied the human admiral carefully. Torres looked tired. There were shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many missions like this one. "Why did you come?" Lilac asked directly. "We're nobody to you." Torres seemed genuinely confused by the question. "You sent a distress call. Someone needed help. But the risk, the danger to your own people." "What does that have to do with anything?" Torres leaned forward slightly. "Where I come from, we have a saying, we leave no one behind. Doesn't matter if we know them or not." This concept baffled Lilac. Most species calculated cost versus benefit before committing to action. Helping strangers at great personal risk was unusual behavior. Your species must be very different from mine. Maybe, Tors allowed, but I don't think we're that different. You've been running rescue missions for years, right? Flying into danger to help refugees. We're doing the same thing, just with different methods. Lilac had never considered it that way. She had always seen her work as fulfilling cultural obligations. Tors made it sound like a choice. Something humans did because they wanted to. How long have you been running these patrols? Lilac asked. About 6 months. We established regular sweeps of known refugee routes after we joined the galactic community. We monitor distress signals and respond when needed. That must be expensive and dangerous. Tors shrugged. We have problems at home too, always do, but that's not a reason to ignore when others are suffering. We learned a long time ago that looking out for each other is how we all survive. Back in the refugee sections, the human medical teams were finishing their examinations. They had treated minor injuries, distributed medicine, and spent time talking with traumatized families. Patterson sat with a group of elderly passerines, listening to their stories and offering comfort. One elder asked her about Earth. Patterson described oceans that could swallow cities, storms that leveled forests, predators that hunted in packs. The refugees listened with growing understanding of what Deathworld classification truly meant. Everything tried to kill you, one of them asked. Pretty much, Patterson admitted. Our planet is harsh, but it taught us to be careful, to value every life because we know how fragile it is. Maybe that's why we care so much about protecting others. The elder nodded slowly. You fight so fiercely because you understand what it means to be vulnerable. Exactly, Patterson agreed. As the medical teams returned to their ships, Lilac stood with Tors on the Gentle Current's observation deck. Below them, refugees were settling down, feeling safe for the first time in weeks. Human security teams had positioned themselves at key points, standing watch while the passerines rested. What happens to the Ravagers you captured? Lilac asked. We'll turn them over to the Galactic Council for trial. They'll face justice for what they've done. And you'll go back to patrolling. Yes, Tors said simply. There are always more people who need help. Lilac felt something shift in her understanding. These humans were not conquerors or destroyers. They were guardians who had chosen to protect the helpless. Their violence was not cruelty, but a tool used in service of compassion. Your species is remarkable, she said quietly. Tors smiled slightly. We're just doing what we think is right, trying to make the galaxy a little safer for people like you, people who dedicate their lives to helping refugees. Will you escort us the rest of the way? Our navigation systems were damaged. Of course, we'll make sure you reach the sanctuary cluster safely. As Tors returned to her ship, Lilac realized something important. The humans had not just saved them from the Ravagers. They had shown the galaxy what real strength looked like. Not conquest or domination, but the courage to stand between the helpless and those who would harm them. The Deathworlders were exactly what the galaxy needed, even if no one had known to ask for them. The journey to Sanctuary Cluster would take 4 days at the convoy's maximum safe speed. The human fleet formed a protective box around the refugee transports, scanning constantly for threats. Thunder's Wake took point while Pacific Guard covered the rear. Mountain's Fury and Desert Storm flew parallel on either side. During the second day, several Passerine crew members accepted an invitation to tour the human vessels. Lilac brought Whistler and 2 other officers to Thunder's Wake, curious to understand how these Deathworlders actually lived. The ship felt cramped compared to Passerine designs. Humans apparently valued function over comfort. Every corridor served multiple purposes. Storage lockers doubled as structural supports. The walls were covered with access panels, making repairs easier during combat. Nothing was hidden or decorative. A young human officer named Riley gave them the tour. He moved through the tight spaces with ease, completely adapted to the environment. "I know it's not much to look at," he admitted, "but these ships keep us alive." "Everything has backups," Whistler observed, pointing to redundant power conduits. "And the backups have backups," Riley confirmed with a grin. "We design expecting the worst. If one system fails, 3 others take over. Hull breach, sealed automatically, power loss, emergency generators kick in. We built these ships like we built everything else back home, to survive." They visited the engineering section, where human technicians worked on repairs from the battle. The damage looked severe to passerine eyes, but the humans seemed unconcerned. They welded new plates over breaches and rerouted systems around damaged sections like it was routine maintenance. Lilac noticed something interesting. The human crew members constantly checked on each other. An engineer would pause to bring water to a colleague. Someone working overhead would have another person spotting them for safety. They functioned as a tightly bonded unit. "You work well together," she commented. Riley nodded. "We have to. Space is dangerous enough without adding poor teamwork. We watch each other's backs, make sure everyone gets home." In the mess hall, human crew members shared their meal break with the passerine visitors. The food was strange to bird-like aliens, but offered with genuine hospitality. A cook named Williams insisted they try something called pasta, explaining it was a comfort food from Earth. The taste was odd but not unpleasant. More importantly, the atmosphere was warm. Humans laughed and told stories, including their guests in the conversation without making them feel like outsiders. Several crew members asked thoughtful questions about passerine culture, genuinely interested in learning. During the third day, refugees who had been nervous about the human presence started seeking them out. Children especially seemed drawn to the human security teams stationed throughout the convoy. The guards responded with patience, showing young passerines their equipment and answering endless questions. Dr. Patterson continued making rounds, checking on patients and building relationships with refugee families. She had a gift for making people feel heard. When an elderly passerine expressed fear about reaching the sanctuary cluster, Patterson sat with him for an hour, just listening and offering reassurance. On the Bridge of Thunder's wake, Tors and Lilac had fallen into a pattern of sharing quiet conversations during night cycles. The Admiral worked long hours but always made time to check in with the refugee convoy leader. "Tell me about Earth," Lilac asked one evening. "What makes a world so dangerous that its people become like you?" Tors considered the question carefully. "Earth has every type of hazard you can imagine: violent storms, shifting continents, extreme temperatures, predators evolved specifically to hunt us, diseases that could wipe out populations. Our planet tried very hard to kill us." "How did your species survive?" "We adapted, learned to work together because solo humans don't last long. We developed tools, built shelters, formed communities. Most importantly, we learned to value every member of the group. When resources are scarce and danger is constant, you can't afford to waste anyone." Whistler, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "That's why you protect strangers, because your survival instinct includes others." "Maybe," Tors agreed. "Or maybe we just remember what it's like to be the ones who needed help. Human history is full of disasters where no rescue came. We decided when we reached the stars we'd be different. We'd be the ones who show up." On the fourth day, long-range sensors detected unusual activity ahead. The sanctuary cluster was broadcasting intermittent distress signals. Tors immediately went to combat alert, her casual demeanor vanishing in an instant. "All ships battle stations," she ordered across the fleet channel. "Lilac, keep your convoy behind us. Something's wrong up ahead." The human vessels increased speed, pushing their engines harder. Crew members who had been relaxed and friendly moments ago transformed into focused warriors. Every station was manned. Weapons systems came online. Shields were raised to full power. Lilac felt her heart's racing. They were so close to safety. Just a few more hours and the refugees would reach sanctuary. Whatever was happening, she prayed the human fleet could handle it. As they approached the cluster, the situation became clear. A massive Ravager armada had surrounded the refugee stations. Dozens of Corsair ships, far more than 4 human vessels could possibly handle. The pirates were systematically destroying defensive platforms and boarding civilian habitats. Lilac's hope died. They were too late, and the humans were impossibly outnumbered. Tors studied the tactical display, her jaw set in determination. All vessels, combat formation Delta 7. Commander Hayes from Pacific Guard objected carefully. Admiral, there are 42 enemy ships out there. Tors never looked away from the display. I can count, Hayes. Are you ready or not? There was a pause, then Hayes laughed darkly over the channel. Ready, Admiral. Let's remind them who we are. Tors opened a channel to all ships, both human and refugee. Listen up. I know the odds look bad, they are bad, but those are innocent people down there and we're the only help that's coming. So we're going in and we're going to make every shot count. We're going to show these pirates what happens when Deathworlders get angry. All ships follow me in. The 4 human vessels accelerated toward impossible odds. Lilac watched them go and realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. These humans knew they were outnumbered, knew they might not survive, and they were charging in anyway because people needed help. That was what real courage looked like. Dreadlord Carvax commanded the Ravager armada from his flagship, a massive dreadnought called the Bone Crusher. He had assembled 42 Corsair vessels for this raid, the largest pirate fleet in this sector. The sanctuary cluster would fall in hours, and thousands of refugees would be claimed as slaves or worse. His sensors picked up 4 new contacts approaching at high speed. Small warships, unknown configuration. Carvax checked the identification signals and laughed. Humans, the newest species to join galactic civilization, coming to play hero with just 4 ships. He opened a general broadcast, making sure both his fleet and the approaching vessels could hear. 4 little Deathworld ships against my armada. You're either very brave or very stupid. Turn around and live. Admiral Tors responded immediately, her voice cutting through the channel like ice. This is Admiral Tors of the Human Defense Fleet. Ravager forces, cease your attack on civilian targets immediately and withdraw. This is your only warning. Carvex found this hilarious. Or what? You'll scratch my paint. There are 42 ships under my command, you have 4. Do the math, human. We have, Tors said quietly. And we're done watching you hurt innocent people. Last chance to leave. Carvax ended the transmission and prepared his fleet for an easy victory. He would crush these arrogant Deathworlders quickly, then return to harvesting refugees. He ordered 8 ships to engage the human fleet while the others continued boarding operations at the stations. Tors saw the Ravager response and smiled grimly. They took the bait. All ships execute Plan Chaos. The human vessels did not engage the 8 ships sent to destroy them. Instead, Thunder's Wake and Mountain's Fury punched straight through the Ravager formation, ignoring everything except Carvax's command ship. They took heavy fire from multiple angles but kept pushing forward. Pacific Guard and Desert Storm flanked wide, targeting not combat vessels but supply ships and communication relays. The Ravagers had brought support craft to haul away captured refugees. Those became the first casualties. Carvax realized too late that the humans were not fighting a conventional battle. They had identified the fleet's weaknesses and attacked with surgical precision. His command vessel suddenly found itself facing 2 human warships at close range. All ships protect the Bone Crusher, he ordered, but his communications were degrading. Desert Storm had activated its full electronic warfare suite, jamming signals and creating ghost images on sensors. The carefully coordinated armada was losing cohesion. Thunder's wake and Mountain's fury opened fire on the command ship from opposite angles. Kinetic rounds hammered into the dreadnought's shields at point-blank range. Carvax's vessel was built to dominate space battles, but it was designed to fight at range, not in a knife fight with determined Deathworlders. The shields collapsed under sustained railgun fire. Armor plating began to crack. Carvax felt his ship shudder with each impact and realized these humans were not trying to disable his vessel. They were trying to kill it. Inside the Sanctuary cluster, Passerine defense forces watched the human assault with growing amazement. They had been hiding, certain that resistance was futile. Now they saw 4 ships taking on an entire armada and actually making progress. Elder Songweaver, leader of the Refugee Council, made a decision. If Deathworlders could fight for them, the Passerines could fight for themselves. He ordered all defensive forces to activate. They could not destroy Ravager ships, but they could protect civilians and evacuate people from boarding parties. Lilac coordinated with the Sanctuary defenders from the Gentle Current. She directed human fire support while Passerine fighters harried boarding craft. The collaboration was crude but effective. Humans cleared paths while refugees ran for safety. Back in the main battle, the Ravager fleet was falling apart. Without clear communications, ships began making individual decisions. Some tried to flee. Others attacked the nearest target, which was sometimes another Ravager vessel. The numerical advantage had become a liability. Human interceptor wings swarmed through the chaos like predatory insects. They could not destroy capital ships, but they could disable weapons and engines. Every Ravager that lost mobility became a target for the larger human vessels. Carvax attempted to restore order, but Thunder's Wake had other plans. Tors brought her ship alongside his dreadnought in a maneuver that seemed insane. Hull to hull, both vessels hammering each other with every weapon they had. Admiral, forward sections are taking critical damage, her damage control officer reported. Hull breaches on decks 3 through 5. Seal them and keep firing, Tors ordered calmly. We're not backing off. The Thunder's Wake shuddered under impacts that would have destroyed most ships, but it had been built by humans who understood that sometimes you had to take damage to achieve victory. Redundant systems kept weapons firing even as sections of the hull vented atmosphere. Tors watched the tactical display and waited for the right moment. The Bone Crusher's bridge was heavily armored, but there was a weak point where shield generators connected to the main hull. She had been waiting for the generators to cycle. Fire solution ready, her weapons officer announced. Fire, Tors said simply. 3 railgun rounds traveled the short distance between ships and punched directly into the shield generator junction. The explosion cascaded through the Bone Crusher systems, taking out primary power and leaving the command bridge exposed. Tors immediately hailed Carvax. Your ship is crippled. Surrender now or we finish this. Carvax looked at his dead control boards and made the only choice available. He surrendered. Without his coordination, the rest of the Ravager fleet began broadcasting their own surrender signals. A few tried to run, but human ships hunted them down efficiently. The entire engagement lasted 90 minutes. 4 human vessels had broken a 42-ship armada through tactics, courage, and sheer refusal to quit. Not a single refugee station was destroyed, though several had suffered damage. Tors slumped in her command chair, exhausted. Around her, the bridge crew was working on damage control. They had paid a price for this victory. 37 crew members lost, dozens more injured. 3 of the 4 ships needed extensive repairs. But the refugees were safe. That made the cost worth paying. Elder Songweaver hailed Thunder's Wake personally. You saved thousands of lives today. We owe you everything. No, Tors replied quietly. You owe us nothing. Just help others when you can, that's all we ask. The human medical bays were overwhelmed with wounded, but Dr. Patterson still sent teams to the refugee stations. She had been working for 40 straight hours, moving between treating her own people and checking on civilians. When Lilac tried to insist she rest, Patterson just shook her head and kept working. "These people need help now," she said simply. "I'll sleep when everyone's stable." The damage to Thunder's wake was severe. Entire sections were sealed off due to hull breaches. The engineering crew worked around the clock to restore critical systems. Despite their losses, the human crew maintained their professional focus. They mourned their dead but kept the ship running. Admiral Torres visited the wounded in medical, spending time with each crew member. She remembered all their names, knew details about their families. Several would never return to active duty. She sat with them personally, making sure they understood their sacrifice mattered. The Sanctuary Cluster's Governing Council requested a formal meeting once the immediate crisis passed. Torres accepted, though she wanted nothing more than to return to Earth space for repairs. Elder Songweaver led the council, and he greeted Torres with profound respect. "You came for strangers," he said. "Fought impossible odds, lost your people protecting ours. The Passerine nation is forever in your debt." Torres stood straight despite her exhaustion. "We did what was necessary. Any decent species would have done the same." "But they did not," Songweaver replied. "We sent distress calls to every nearby system. The council patrols were too far. Commercial shipping companies calculated the risk and declined to help. Only humans responded. Only Deathworlders cared enough to fight for us." The council offered everything they had: trade agreements, territory, access to rare resources. Torres declined it all. "We don't do this for payment. We protect refugees because it's the right thing to do. Just help others when you get the chance. That's all we ask." Songweaver studied the human admiral carefully. "Your species is unique. You have the power to dominate, yet you choose to protect. You could demand tribute, yet you ask for nothing. What made humans this way?" Torres considered the question. "We come from a world that tried to kill us every day. We learned that survival meant working together, protecting the vulnerable. When we reached space, we saw others who needed protection. It felt natural to help." News of the battle spread rapidly through galactic networks. The story of 4 human ships defeating a massive pirate armada captured imaginations across civilized space. More importantly, species that had feared humans began to reconsider their assumptions. Deathworlders were dangerous, yes, but they were dangerous to those who threatened the innocent. They were protectors, not conquerors. Within weeks, other refugee groups began specifically requesting human escorts. The phrase, "human defense fleet," started appearing in distress calls. Species that once avoided Earth space now actively sought it out, knowing humans patrolled those routes. The Galactic Council formally recognized humanity's contribution to refugee protection. They offered full council membership and a seat on the Security Committee. Earth's representatives accepted, though human patrol patterns did not change. They had been protecting refugees before recognition and would continue regardless. Lilac returned to her rescue work with a new perspective. She had witnessed what real courage looked like. She had seen a species with every reason to be selfish instead dedicate themselves to protecting strangers. It changed how she thought about her own mission. She started a new tradition among Passerine rescue vessels. Every ship would carry a small human flag as a symbol of gratitude. More importantly, they would try to embody the lesson humans had taught them. Help was not something you gave only when convenient. It was something you provided because others needed it. 6 months after the battle, Lilac's convoy was escorting refugees through a relatively safe corridor. Her long-range sensors picked up a distress signal from a damaged freighter under attack by raiders. The logical choice was to call for military support and wait. Instead, Lilac ordered her convoy to change course and respond. They could not fight, but they could evacuate the freighter crew before the raiders destroyed it. Her crew looked at her in surprise, and she smiled. "We learn from the best," she said simply. Meanwhile, Admiral Torres was back on Thunder's wake, fully repaired and on patrol. The defense fleet had expanded, with more ships assigned to refugee route protection. But Torres still led from the front, personally responding to distress calls. A young ensign asked her during a quiet watch why she kept taking these dangerous assignments. Torres looked out at the stars and thought about all the people they had saved. All the lives protected because someone showed up when called. "Because somewhere out there, someone will need help," she replied. "And humans decided a long time ago that we'll always answer that call. We leave no one behind. Not our own people, not strangers, not anyone who sends up a signal asking for rescue." Throughout the galaxy, a new understanding of humanity was taking root. They were Deathworlders, products of a harsh planet that had forged them into survivors. But they had chosen to use that strength not for conquest but for protection. They were the species that came when called, the ones who fought impossible odds to save strangers, the guardians who asked nothing in return except that others help when they could. In refugee centers across civilized space, a common image appeared on walls. Children drew it in schools. Adults posted it in their homes. It showed 4 human ships, larger than life, protecting smaller vessels from danger. The captions varied, but the message was always the same. The Deathworlders who saved us, the humans who cared, the protectors who proved that strength and compassion were not opposites. Earth had produced warriors, yes, but more importantly, it had produced a species that understood the value of every life, that remembered what it meant to need help and made sure they were always ready to provide it. Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of Thunder's wake, monitoring patrol routes and distress frequencies. Somewhere in the dark, someone would eventually need them, and when that call came, humanity would respond. Because that was what Deathworlders did. They protected those who could not protect themselves. They stood between the innocent and those who would harm them. They remembered that strength without compassion was just cruelty, but strength in service of others was heroism. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. When you needed help, when all seemed lost, when no one else would come, there was one species you could count on. You called the humans, and they would answer.